Today, we're diving deep into the gorgeous, winding streets of Barcelona. But we're going to look past those picture-perfect postcard views to uncover a story of invention, ambition, and a tragedy that's been hiding in plain sight this whole time. Okay, so look at this. On the left, you've got a simple, pretty sparse little corner of Old Barcelona. And on the right, that's the iconic, ancient Gothic quarter. You know, the one that tourists from all over the world flock to because it just feels so steeped in medieval history. But take a really close look. Are we actually looking at the same history here? And that really brings us to the core question of this whole explainer. Is Barcelona's world-famous Gothic quarter really an authentic piece of the Middle Ages, or is it something else entirely? I mean, when you see an image like this, your mind just goes there, right? You think of knights and soaring cathedrals, centuries of history just carved right into the stone. But the truth is, that feeling, that impression, it was very carefully and very deliberately built. All right, let's just rip the Band-Aid off. The Barri Gothic, the Gothic quarter as we know it today, isn't some perfectly preserved medieval neighborhood. Nope. A huge amount of what you see was actually built, or at least heavily changed, in the early 20th century. It's an invention. So the next logical question is a big one. How, and more importantly, why would an entire city decide to invent its own past on such a massive scale? Well, let's get into it. Okay, so you had two huge forces colliding in Barcelona around the turn of the 20th century. First, you had this massive surge of Catalan nationalism, this cultural rebirth called the Renaissance. And they were looking back to this idealized medieval golden age to find their identity. And for them, Gothic architecture became the symbol of that amazing past. At the exact same time, the city's leaders wanted to put Barcelona on the world map. So in 1908, they literally created something called the Tourist Attraction Society with one very clear goal: make Barcelona a must-see destination. The solution to both? Create a spectacular, authentic Gothic experience that would sell. You know, there's actually a term for this. It's called staged authenticity. It's a fancy phrase for a simple idea. You build something to feel real, to give people the exact experience they're hoping for, even if the history is brand new. Really, it's kind of like creating a historical theme park, where the vibe and the atmosphere are way more important than the actual age of the buildings. And this quote, wow, it just nails the feeling at the time. This wasn't just about making things look pretty for tourists. As Joaquin Folch y Torres put it back in 1912, reconstructing monuments is the same as reconstructing the homeland. For them, this was a deeply political, super emotional act of building a nation. So how'd they pull it off? The lead architect, a guy named Adolf Florenza, spent 40 years on this, and he basically had a 3-part playbook. Step 1, restore. Take actual medieval buildings and fix them up. But often they'd restore them to a more perfect, idealized Gothic version of themselves. Step 2, relocate. If there was a cool medieval building somewhere else in the city, no problem. They would literally move it, stone by stone, into the quarter. And finally, step 3, harmonize. They tore down any buildings that didn't fit the vibe and built brand new neo-Gothic ones to create this perfectly unified, camera-ready look. But wait, it gets even more interesting. There's another layer to this whole story, a really fascinating contradiction at its core. Let's call it the Baroque paradox. So, check this out. On one side, Catalan nationalism totally rejected the Baroque style. You know, all that super ornate, flashy stuff. They saw it as the art of the Castilian crown, their occupiers. But, and this is the paradox, while they hated the look of the Baroque, they completely embraced its philosophy for designing their city. So what in the world is a Baroque mentality? Well, it's about seeing the city as one giant stage, a total work of art. It's about creating these grand, straight avenues and huge monuments that guide a visitor through a spectacular, theatrical experience. Originally, back in 17th century Rome, that visitor was a religious pilgrim. But by the 20th century in Barcelona, that pilgrim was the tourist. And this quote just proves it. The whole goal was to create, quote, a transitable space in which pilgrims who are unfamiliar with the city can orient themselves. They literally took the urban planning playbook from Baroque Rome and used it to build the Gothic quarter of Barcelona. It's kind of wild when you think about it. But let's shift gears for a minute. Let's zoom into one specific spot inside this invented quarter. Because behind all the architectural history, there's a much darker, much more human story. a story of real trauma that was deliberately covered up. This is the Plaça De Sant Felip Neri. If you just stumble upon it, it feels like one of the most romantic, peaceful little squares in the whole city. It's a quiet escape from all the crowds. But I want you to look really closely at the walls of that church. You see that? The stone is just shredded. It's covered in these deep scars and pockmarks. For decades, people have told different stories about what caused them. But what's the real story these walls are telling us? The truth is, from January 30th, 1938, right in the middle of the Spanish Civil War, at about 9 in the morning, bombers from Mussolini's Italian Air Force, who were allies of Franco, attacked the square. Children from a nearby school were rushed into the church to hide. A bomb hit it directly. But the horror didn't stop. In what was a horribly brutal new tactic, the bombers flew off, waited for over 2 hours until rescue workers and first responders filled the square, and then they came back and bombed the exact same spot again, just to maximize the casualties. 42 people were killed right there, in that one little square. 42 lives, gone. And most of them were just kids. And here is where the story gets twisted into a battle for memory. The reality, the historical fact, is that those walls are scarred by shrapnel from that fascist bombing. But after the war, Franco's new regime couldn't possibly admit that their allies had murdered dozens of children. So they invented a new story. They started telling everyone that the marks were from anarchist firing squads executing priests. It was a total lie. Propaganda designed to hide a war crime and literally rewrite history on the very walls where it happened. So when you put all of this together, the invention of an entire neighborhood, and the deliberate cover-up of a tragedy, you really do start to see the city in a completely new light. So let's just quickly recap what we found. Barcelona's Gothic heart is this brilliant early example of staged authenticity, all driven by national pride and the need for tourism. But buried under that beautiful surface, there are real, painful histories that were intentionally hidden from view. It's just proof that cities aren't these static museums. They are living, breathing documents that are constantly being rewritten for all sorts of reasons. Now, the point of all this isn't to say Barcelona isn't beautiful. It absolutely is. But its story is just so much richer, so much more complicated, and honestly, so much more fascinating once you know what to look for, once you can see the seams between what's real and what's invented. And really, that's what I want to leave you with. Learning to see Barcelona this way gives us all a new lens. It makes you want to look around your own town, your own city, and ask a simple question. What stories are being told here? And, maybe more importantly, what stories are being hidden?